Hi everyone, this is Jenny and I am going to do a layout share for a special layout. I hope it will be special for a scrapbook I have that is called You Should Know, and it's all about family and different family members, especially ones that my children either didn't get a chance to know or never met. But people that I thought would be important and thought would be a good way for them to go back and read things about their family and about their heritage and things that are more than just documenting birthdays and other things like that that are important too, but a little bit more serious. So anyway, that's the plan. And I was mostly inspired by this paper from the cut and paste line by Amy Tan, and I just love the little cross stitch, and it just reminds me of, you know, my grandmother and handmade things, and so I started thinking about that kind of idea about family and handmade things. And I love Paige Evans' design. She is amazing with just paper and a couple punches, or just paper and scissors, and what she does, and it's very quilt inspired and very intricate and amazingly put together. And I was kind of inspired by a lot of the way she puts paper pieces, things together to make it look like a quilt, and that kind of led me to the whole family quilt and that kind of idea. So with that in mind, that is kind of the base for this idea. I don't think I'm going to use this as the base, but it will definitely be a big piece of it. And I love this piece. It was a part of the, it was the Maggie Holmes, I can't remember which collection. It's not the Style Board, it was the other one, but it was a little mini book, and this was just torn out, and these aren't from 1976, but I just love the stamp dates, and that might be a photo mat. These are the photos that I was going to scrap. They're both of my grandmother. They were taken from some old photos that I had scanned in and tried to run through a little bit of a cleanup process trying to restore it. You can see where one of the old photos there. My grandmother died several years ago, but if she was still alive, she would have been 100 on her past birthday, which is pretty special. And this was in Ireland. My mother is from Ireland, so we are going there on vacation this summer with our children, and it's going to be kind of a pretty special trip. Probably, you know, who knows if they'll ever get to go again. And so this is kind of in preparation for a lot of that. This was a photograph that I believe was taken at the family farm, and this was on the coast. And I just thought these pictures were great because, I mean, she was probably maybe 18 then, and so I just loved the style of the photograph, the contrast, everything about it. So I'm still trying to decide which picture I might do, because I'm trying to do a little bit more of a serious one. I think I'm going to go with this picture, but eventually, I mean, I have several of these that all came from an album that were saved, that I've scanned in and tried to scrap a little bit of as I can. So that's probably going to be the picture, and then I pulled lots of papers that, honestly, I'm not super florally, so this is a good way to use some of the papers that I would normally probably not use, because I thought it needed to be something nice. I'm planning on trying to do sort of a quilted kind of look, I think. So I pulled these kind of papers that are along this sort of color of sort of soft pinks and like an ivory tone for the background and stuff. These are both from Thick and Frolic, I believe. Yes, and this is crepe paper, and so is this. And I love this because it still has that distressed look, but it's also, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of a quilt, but it also kind of looks like a shamrock. So I thought that was nice for Ireland and for for St. Patrick's Day. So this is I don't know whether I'm going to use this or not. I did like the color and the text. This is a piece of Teresa Collins paper. That's nice. But I was trying to pick different things, have a variety of different graphic scales so that there's like a bigger print and then small prints and just a variety of it so it doesn't get too muddled up with too many colors. And then in keeping with the whole idea of quilting and people from that generation and just how amazing of a person she was to me, and made something out of nothing all the time, I just thought it would be great to use lots of these, some of my favorite pieces that I couldn't throw away, and use them somehow in it. So these are all pieces of different collections. I think they are all Dear Lizzie. And this is My Mind's Eye, and this is My Mind's Eye. And they're all pieces of my favorites that I've used for something or other and couldn't put in a scrap bin, but stayed in the drawer with the full pieces. So I'm going to plan on using some of those. I wanted to use a piece of this map paper because of obviously the map, and maybe have a little bit of that as far as the location, but I'm not sure about some of the colors going together with it. And then this is just a piece of coordinations in the ivory color. This is whitewash. And another piece of like an ivory cardstock. I thought I might use this, or some of this as well. This is the Now and Then collection from My Mind's Eye. I can't believe I haven't dug into this yet. But I love this flower piece here. And this just reminded me of the, you know, that whole quilty kind of thing. And I may do triangles and sew it on. So I'm not sure whether I'll use that or not. And then I have these fine, really thin wood, very thin wood veneers. And so I thought about painting that or stamping those as part of it. And then real quick for some embellishments and things, I made some cuts on the silhouette, knowing that I was going to use that, and this is the file from that same paper from Amy Tan, the stitch paper, and I had thought I was going to pull it out and actually stitch those lines, but I like it like that, so I may use the negative. And then this is another heart that, but I actually may stitch around that with some floss or some embroidery thread. And a little sort of family circle, another one that says Made with Love or Made with, and then a heart and some little leaves. And this is out of that Coordinations cardstock because I thought it would be nice and neutral and I might mist it or paint it, but honestly it didn't really cut. This is the main piece I wanted, which cut beautifully, but the rest of it didn't cut that great. I don't think it's meant to cut as curved like that. I think it'll be nice because I'm kind of going for that rustic look. So then I've got these other frames and sort of slide frames from Maggie Holmes from the Style Board, and this was kind of the one I picked out for that to go with that, and some doilies, a little fabric doily from, I think that's My Mind's Eye, and some other little bits and pieces of things that I had sort of sitting around. I like this camera, so I thought about using that somehow, but I'm going to desperately try to not junk this up too much, even though I like that look, but to try to keep it more with this kind of idea of the quilt and keep things in these sort of boxes. So I'm not sure if that's going to make it in there. And then I love this too. I've used different pieces of this, but I just liked it because it was sewn and pleated and kind of went along with that. So those are the things I'm going to kind of start with. And the other things I had was, I had this, this is part of a box set from Glitz, this lace sort of doily border, and I thought about using that. And some other little bits and pieces here. I pulled some more little chipboard flowers and things, and that gold slide frame. Even though I'm still just on this gold kick, I think I'm gonna hold off on that for this layout because she was not very flashy and much more down to earth. And even though I like the vellum and I like the slide part of it for the photograph, I think it'd be nice just to kind of leave that simple. So that is where I'm going to start. I've also got a couple distress inks in tea dye and antique linen, and I am going to get everything set up and get started. And I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back and I think ready to go. I made some decisions kind of just thinking about what I started talking about. So I did decide to go with this photo, and I did decide this would be the background, the main background, and I think I'm going to mount the entire thing on this and have that as a border so that you see more of that color and more of those sort of shamrock kind of things. So I'll end up trimming this down a bit. And I also decided that I want to make it very, I want to make it symmetrical and balanced and have sort of 4 quadrants, like just a grid, and have the photo in one part, the title in one part, the journaling in one part, and then just more embellishment in another part. And one of these cuts will probably be my title, so that's not going to be rocket science for that, but I thought I might do, you know, if this is the title, well, no, maybe something like that, and have the heart staggered, or something along those lines. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out.
Okay, I actually sped this up a pretty good bit, and I cut a big chunk out there a minute ago where I actually did a sketch because I kind of just went around the world, and this video ended up being a lot longer than I had really hoped. So in fact it did turn out to be a labor of love, which I think was appropriate. It was one of those times when everything went wrong, and I had to keep stopping and taking care of, you know, that whole life thing. So anyway, this is how I started out. I cut that photo down to a square, and then I just used my scissors a little bit to measure out these first couple blocks to get them pretty close in size. And then I just started cutting different pieces of that pattern paper I had picked out and and I went through a long process of trying to figure out which pieces looked better with each other, what sizes they should be, what patterns should be on top of each other, and what shouldn't be, and trying to find things that went together but that had some contrast. And so that ended up kind of being a lot longer of a process than I had hoped, just because I knew how things were going to lay out and I knew it was going to be this quadrant, but I ended up doing a lot of sewing and a lot of sort of fiddling with these papers. So that's pretty much where I end up working with a lot of that. That is some of that coordinations paper that I used for those die cuts, and I was actually worried about it at first because it didn't cut super well on the silhouette, but it's nice because it's got that sort of middle color and it looks a little bit more rustic. So I like the way that turned out. This piece of paper that I used on the bottom is, I can't remember, I think it might be a pack of, I can't remember something, but it's got a slicker finish. It's not a Basil or American Crafts textured cardstock. It's got a really slick finish, and I had a problem with the, you'll see I had a problem with the distress ink trying to stay to it, and I finally figured out that actually, I thought it might dry eventually, but it didn't really. It just kind of sat there for a little bit, so that was kind of a bummer too. One of the things that went wrong. So anyway, this is, I decided to pull that dark cardstock out because I really wanted a punch of something behind a couple of the pieces, and I tried to balance out where 2 of the squares had more layers, and then the 2 other squares that had less layers, where the photo and the title are, I actually popped up and used pop dots. So those 2 pieces were sort of elevated a little bit to give it a little bit more prominence, and then the other pieces were just more stacked layers. I ended up trading this around so I could have those hearts in a diagonal sort of off center, and I had the photograph at the bottom to make it, to weigh it down a bit. And I trimmed little pieces off of this, and I wanted the flowers to show but not too much, and so I really went through a lot of that. And when I did sew it, I sewed them, each of the squares individually, and then sewed them all together as each individual big squares, and then sewed all of those squares down with a big X onto the to the large background piece. And I don't show this sewing because my sewing machine is not right, it's not within reach of the camera. So like I said, I'm flipping this around trying to find how I'm going to make it work out. I don't know whether I was indecisive or I just wanted to get it right, but I ended up being pretty frustrated with just the whole process of trying to work it out. So as you can see, that's why I called it a labor of love. I pulled out those October afternoon pieces from one of the bits, sort of bits and pieces, and they have one is a text writing from like a dictionary print, and the other one is it's neat because it's a kind of a sewing pattern, that scalloped one that's behind the heart. And it I mean, you don't really see the sewing pattern part, but I thought it was kind of a neat little tiny detail. I wanted to have something in the middle there, and I ended up not using that piece from My Mind's Eye. I ended up using a piece of the chipboard from Dear Lizzie because I just thought those colors from the My Mind's Eye, the shape was better, but I thought the colors were a little bit too vivid. So I ended up going back to that one that's more pastel. So I finally decided to commit to these pieces, and I glued down a little bit of it, and then I did end up going back and making that a pocket to have my journaling on. So I go ahead and layer all of those up, and then I'll go off to my sewing machine and stitch around all of those. So that's where I had planned to put the journaling. As it turned out, I actually did end up accidentally stitching through the big X that held all four of them down. I ended up stitching through part of that, so I couldn't fit that tag in there. But I did go back and add my journaling on the back, so it's not quite as interactive as I'd hoped, but it still has something that you know, that's more special that needs to be read. So this is me trying to distress the edges, and I knew I wanted it to be, you know, I didn't really care if it wasn't real super blended. I just wanted it to have a different, more aged look and grunge it up a bit. And then I started to realize it kind of came off on my hand. I used the heat gun on it a little bit, but that still didn't work. Eventually it did kind of dry off a bit, and then I decided to use this twine, or well, it's more like sort of stitching thread, crochet thread, and strung it along this heart, and ended up getting pretty frustrated by it because that paper really, that coordinations paper, isn't really meant to be sewn with. It was kind of a struggle to get that to work. Okay, so now I've got all my pieces sewn and inked the edges of them. I have these two little pieces of leaves that I watercolored just to take off a little bit of the ivory kind of color and tie them into the chipboard in the middle. I must not be doing it right, and I'm used to watercolor a lot more, so I guess I'm just used to a normal watercolor brush, but somehow whenever I use the those water brushes, I end up getting more of the paint inside the brush than I do using the water as a dispenser, and that's ends up being really frustrating. So I'm not quite sure whether I'm not doing that right or not. Okay, so that's where everything's going to end up. And I found this tape from, it's Seven Gypsies. It's an older one. I had it in a package. I think it was on clearance at Hobby Lobby, and I thought it was more like washi tape, but it's not. It's like regular tape. So here's where my ATG gun messes up, and I could not get it to work right, so I had to switch to a different adhesive. I have those so that the top right corner and the bottom left corner are a little bit bigger, and those are the ones with more layers, and it just sort of worked out that way. And then I kind of fluff up all of the pieces that were sewn down to give it some more texture and a little bit of shadow and dimension. I had just gotten a new sewing machine several months ago, and I haven't really used it too much, so this was kind of a nice way to give me lots of practice on it because there was quite a bit of stitching. Okay, so I went ahead and stitched that down, the big cross down the two sides of it, and now I'm just putting those last pieces on there. I end up needing to use some Tombow mono glue on that heart because of the stitching, and then I needed to use it on my chipboard as well. I glued that little bitty die cut straight to the photograph, and then I used that tape kind of to tie it together, and also to give sort of a place for the chipboard and for the little leaves to have some contrast underneath it. And then I layered that heart in the middle of it. I sort of ended up doing that one-handed so I could hold the chipboard down until it dried a bit. And then one of my favorite things to use for a paperweight while glue is drying are lots of big punches. So there's my punches layered up so that they can help it dry. And that is pretty much the way it looks. I do go back and put a little piece of, that's where I realized I had stitched that down. Like I said, it was just a labor of love to get to the final point, even though it was fairly simplistic. But I did end up putting a piece of paper at the top right corner and at the bottom corner just to add something else where I could add a little bit of the journaling for the year and the location. And one of the pieces is from Dear Lizzie, that's As Your Heart Will Lead You Home. I believe it's on the bottom of one of the branding strips. And I used a couple stick pins there in the middle just to hold that in. And I thought it was neat because it was kind of like a sewing pin. One of them is. I really wanted to use that little crocheted piece from My Mind's Eye, but I couldn't find, because it was gray, and I couldn't really find a place for it that I liked. So those are the two other little pieces I tuck in, and then I did write the date at the top, and at the bottom were sort of a circa date because I didn't know exactly, my mother couldn't remember exactly what year it was. But here you can see the close-ups and see how much stitching I really did, and then the final product at the end. Thanks so much for watching and sticking through this crazy video, and hopefully next time I won't have as much problems with everything at the last minute. I'd love any feedback anyone has, and thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.